China. Premier Wall, what was your thinking behind this request? What concerns you the most?
Well, Don, we had some concerns prior to the disaster, the tragedy in Paris on Friday, informed mostly by concerns around settlement. We had our major city mayors were concerned around the settlement issue. Some of the settlement groups on the front lines were concerned. And then I think that the events in Beirut and Paris are a call to some circumspection. Right now we have a process outlined by the federal government, driven by an election promise, but driven by a deadline. And I don't know if that's the best way to provide for, frankly, the kind of welcome we want to provide for refugees. And Saskatchewan right now has increased the number of refugees that we want to be able to welcome here as a result of the Syrian issue coming to the fore a couple of months ago. But right now, I don't think we want a process driven by a deadline. I think we want it driven by outcomes. And what I mean by that is questions around security and questions around settlement on both of those counts. We know that perhaps the screening process took too long previously. That was part of the debate in the federal election. But we've collapsed that into 45 days for 25,000 people. In Germany, I noted today the chief of the federal police, of the nation's police, was very concerned about the potential for the number of suspects they had, of potential terrorists that were part of migrant groups, that are sort of hiding in migrant groups. In fact, they're dealing with that after the fact. We have a chance to deal with that before the fact. And I just think we need to get it right with respect to security and settlement, and then be the welcoming country that Canada is, and we'd like to be the welcoming province that Saskatchewan is as well.
Yeah, have you consulted other premiers? Because there is a premiers conference coming up, and that I'm sure will be raised. You know, so far, Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, and Alberta are already basically saying, bring them on in.
Well, as I said, we've already accepted more. We've asked for and are receiving more than as a result of the issue when it first came to fore in the federal election, or at least was certainly highlighted in the federal election. And so I think other provinces are doing the same. I think the mayor of Toronto has stated similar concerns to us, and I think Premier Clark in BC has indicated that we need to be careful, certainly, about the security issue. You know, Don, usually one miss out of 25,000 would be acceptable for government or for business or for almost any organization. I don't know that it is in this instance. And so if there have been, we've asked this question of the feds, have the security steps been collapsed? They must be by definition, because it's now 45 days instead of the, well, up to years it took before, which understandably was too long. But we've asked, what are those steps, perhaps, that we're not doing anymore, just to have that discussion? We have a responsibility to the people of the province as well to ask those, and we don't have answers yet. And this is not a criticism of the federal government. The goal is laudatory, for certainly, is laudable. It's the right thing it's the right reaction for Canada to have to a crisis like this. We've just got to make sure we've done it right. This government was just sworn in, and 45 days from now, we're looking at a very large influx. And so we're saying, let's get it right from a settlement perspective and a security perspective. If that means a few months or even a little bit longer delay, then it's worth it, I think.
Can you do anything to stop refugees from coming to Saskatchewan, or is that beyond your power?
No, it is beyond the power of provinces, and we wouldn't do that.
Okay. Okay, I'm curious what you want to respond. Some advocates are saying Brad Wall's comments are hurting the people who are already the victims of ISIS and those who were killed on Friday. What do you say to them that why you're doing what you're doing?
You know, I've seen some of that, and it's obviously disappointing, and I strongly disagree with what's being said. What we're simply saying is we have a refugee intake process, an initiative that's being driven by a date, and I don't think that's good public policy. I don't know of another refugee situation in the recent history, the contemporary history of this country, that was driven by a date. The promise was made in a federal election, and I think Canadians would say to the federal government, we understand that you might not want to make that exact date if there are some questions that need to be asked. As I've said, the German National Chief of Police is asking those questions after the fact, investigating these 10 individuals that they think might be part of this refugee group that are in fact terrorists. We have a chance to ask all of those questions before the fact to make sure we get this right, and I think it's worth that effort. It's worth It's worth an investigation of what steps we've sort of collapsed in this process. And I don't think sort of getting into sort of the name calling or questioning motives is particularly helpful. I don't question the motive of the federal government. I salute it. I know what they're trying to do, and we would like to be a part of it. We're adding more refugees. But let's make sure that we ask all of the questions around security and settlement.
Premier Wall, have you heard back from Justin Trudeau as a result of your letter yet?
We have not. We've been talking to federal ministers throughout this, even before the events in Paris. As I pointed out, we've mentioned to the ministers, Minister McCallum, that there were concerns from around settlement issues, certainly, and we've talked to Mr. Goodale over the weekend, so there'd be no surprises today. This wasn't about a surprise moment to let him know he'd likely be commenting in this way, and so we expect a response back, and we're happy to work with the federal government. Again, there are just some unanswered questions around, what screening steps we may not be doing now because the timelines are so short. And on the settlement issue, we still have concerns represented, by the way, by frontline groups who are these nonprofits that are involved, that we need to get this right. If we don't get it right, any potential implications down the road aren't going to be helpful in trying to help more people in the future. If heaven forbid, more people need to be helped in some other theater of conflict, in some other tragedy.
Right. Well, Premier Wall, we've got the minister on the file that's looking at this plan coming up later in the show. We'll ask her some of your questions. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Thanks, Don.
After the break, we will